Who really earns the money from a cashew grown in Africa? Imagine two cashews harvested from the same tree in Burkina Faso. They are picked by the same farmer under the same Sahel sun. They begin their journey with the same soil, the same labor, and the same hope for a better income. Yet after leaving that farm, their economic journeys can become very different. The first cashew is collected, dried, and sold as a raw agricultural product. It leaves Burkina Faso before many of the later stages of production take place. Somewhere else, workers process it, remove the shell, sort the kernel, check its quality, prepare it for consumers, and package it for sale. The second cashew takes another road. It remains in Burkina Faso longer. Local workers process it. Technicians maintain the machinery. Employees sort and inspect the kernels. Warehouses store the product. Trucks move it between facilities. And if the country advances further along the chain, more packaging and commercial activity can also happen at home. The difference is not simply where a nut is opened. The difference is where jobs, skills, industrial experience, and business opportunities are created. That question now sits at the center of an economic strategy associated with President Ibrahim Traore. His government has increasingly emphasized domestic processing as part of Burkina Faso's effort to build greater control over its own economic future. But this story requires more than inspiring speeches or images of new factories. A factory can be built and still operate far below capacity. An export restriction can protect local processors while creating difficulties for farmers who need buyers. And producing a finished product means little if that product cannot compete in international markets. So the real question is not whether Burkina Faso can keep every dollar from every cashew. No country controls every stage of global commerce. The real question is whether Burkina Faso can capture more of the economic activity generated by what its farmers already produce. If you believe Africa's resources should create more opportunities for the people who produce them, follow this channel. Because today, we are going to follow the money and discover what Burkina Faso's cashew experiment can actually tell us about economic sovereignty. To understand what is at stake, begin with the scale of the trade. In 2024, Burkina Faso reported exporting roughly 113 million kilograms of fresh or dried cashews, worth about $111 million. Those exports travel to markets including the United Arab Emirates, Togo, India, Vietnam, and Singapore. That is a significant flow of agricultural wealth leaving a landlocked West African nation. But the important question is not simply how much Burkina Faso exports. It is what form the product is in when it leaves, and how many economic steps remain after that point. A cashew does not travel directly from a tree into the snack bag purchased by a consumer. After harvesting, the nuts must be collected and dried. Processing removes the hard outer shell. Kernels are then peeled, sorted by size and quality, inspected, prepared for different markets, and eventually packaged and distributed. Depending on the final product, additional roasting, seasoning, branding, and retail operations can follow. Every stage requires something. Workers are paid, machinery is purchased and maintained, warehouses are operated, transportation companies move goods, quality specialists inspect products, businesses provide packaging, financing, logistics, and other services. This is why the debate in Burkina Faso is larger than the price of raw cashews alone. When a country exports early in the production chain, it can still earn substantial income. Farmers are paid, traders conduct business, transporters move the crop, exporters generate revenue. Those contributions should not be dismissed. But activities performed after the product leaves the country create additional economic opportunities somewhere else. That distinction is crucial. It would be misleading to claim that every dollar charged for a package of cashews in an American supermarket could somehow belong to the farmer in Burkina Faso. Shipping, processing, packaging, distribution, marketing, and retail all carry legitimate costs. The more useful question is much simpler. Which of those activities could realistically happen inside Burkina Faso? For the government of Ibrahim Traore, that question increasingly points toward domestic processing. And once we follow two identical cashews beyond the farm gate, we can see exactly why that difference matters. Now follow those two cashews beyond the farm, because this is where the economic parts begin to separate. The first cashew is sold after harvest and eventually exported from Burkina Faso as an agricultural commodity. The country still benefits from producing it. The farmer earns income. Local buyers collect the crop. Truck drivers transport it. Traders and exporters participate in the transaction, but once that cashew leaves, many later activities can take place elsewhere. Workers in another country may remove the shell, peel and grade the kernel, inspect its quality, prepare it for customers, and package it. Other businesses may provide machinery, storage, financing, transportation, and commercial services around those operations. Now consider the second cashew. Instead of leaving Burkina Faso early, it enters a processing facility at home. Suddenly, the economic footprint begins to widen. A worker operates equipment. A technician maintains the machinery. Another employee checks quality. Warehouses need staff. Trucks move materials between farms and factories. Managers organize production. Businesses provide spare parts, cleaning, packaging, security, and other services. The cashew has not magically become more valuable simply because it remained inside the country. Value is created because additional work has been performed on it. For an American viewer, think of the difference between exporting timber and producing furniture. The tree remains important in both cases. But turning timber into a finished table requires additional workers, machines, skills, businesses, and knowledge. Cashews follow the same economic principle. This does not mean Burkina Faso can capture the entire price eventually paid by a consumer in Chicago, Atlanta, or New York. International shipping, branding, distribution, retail, and other costs remain part of the final price. Economic sovereignty does not require pretending those costs disappear. It means asking which part of the chain Burkina Faso can perform competitively for itself. That is why domestic processing matters. The goal is not to trap every cashew inside national borders. The goal is to give Burkina Faso a larger role in determining what happens to the crop before it reaches international buyers. And in Bobo Dioulasso, that ambition has now taken the physical form of a major processing plant. That physical expression of Burkina Faso's ambition can be seen in Bobo Dioulasso. On December 20th, 2025, President Ibrahim Traore inaugurated Burkina Cajou, a major cashew processing complex designed to move more of the production chain onto Burkinabe soil. The numbers immediately attracted attention. The facility was announced with a designed processing capacity of roughly 150,000 tons of cashews per year. The investment was reported at about 9.743 billion CFA francs, equivalent to roughly 17 million United States dollars, depending on the exchange rate. Officials also projected approximately 1,700 direct and indirect jobs connected to the operation. For a country seeking to move beyond raw agricultural exports, those numbers represent considerable ambition. But an important distinction must be made. Burkina Cajou should not be described simply as Ibrahim Traore's factory. The project originated with Burkinabe entrepreneur Massoso Traore. When the project encountered difficulties, the government stepped in with support that helped move it toward operation. That detail reveals something important about the economic model taking shape. The government's objective does not necessarily require the state to own every processing line. Instead, public institutions can help domestic businesses acquire financing, overcome investment barriers, and build productive capacity inside the country. If that approach works, the result could be larger than one factory. A successful processor creates demand for farmers and transporters. It needs technicians, managers, maintenance workers, quality inspectors, and suppliers. Those activities can encourage additional businesses to develop around the factory. This is how one agricultural crop can begin supporting a broader industrial ecosystem. Yet, the impressive figure of 150,000 tons comes with a crucial warning. That number represents designed capacity. It does not prove that 150,000 tons are already being processed every year. Factories create economic value when machinery is running, workers are producing, farmers are being paid, and customers are purchasing the final product. Burkina Faso has already learned how large the distance between installed capacity and actual production can become. And one number from the country's recent cashew industry reveals why the next stage of this strategy may be much harder than constructing the factory itself. The number is 11.63%. Before Burkina Cajou was inaugurated, industry data for 2024 estimated that Burkina Faso produced about 195,477 tons of raw cashews. At the same time, the country's installed processing capacity was reported at roughly 60,201 tons. Yet only about 11.63% of that processing capacity was being used. The same industry reports identified 32 processing units, with only 19 operating. Those figures reveal one of the most important lessons in Burkina Faso's effort to capture more value from cashews. Building processing capacity and actually using it are two different achievements. A factory needs more than machines. It needs enough money available at the right time to purchase large quantities of cashews during the harvest. It needs reliable electricity, storage facilities, trained workers, replacement parts, transportation, quality control, and customers willing to buy what it produces. Remove only one of those pieces and an expensive processing line can sit idle. This is why the new Burkina Cajou facility should not yet be judged by its announced capacity of 150,000 tons per year. The older industry figures come from 2024, while Burkina Cajou was inaugurated at the end of 2025. They cannot fairly be used to measure the new factory's performance. The real test will come from future operating results. How many tons will actually pass through its machines? How consistently will it operate? Can it purchase enough cashews without hurting farmers? Can its products meet international standards? And can it find customers at prices that allow the business to survive? These questions may sound less dramatic than a ribbon cutting, but they determine whether industrialization succeeds. For Ibrahim Traore's broader economic vision, that distinction matters enormously. Economic sovereignty cannot be measured by the number of factories appearing in photographs. It must eventually be measured by production, wages, skills, exports, and businesses that remain viable year after year. And Burkina Faso's government soon discovered another difficulty. If processors need more raw cashews, the state can try to redirect the crop toward domestic factories. But when a government changes where farmers can sell their harvest, the consequences can reach the countryside almost immediately. In March 2025, Burkina Faso moved from encouraging domestic processing to directly intervening in the flow of raw cashews. On March 28, the government suspended exports of raw cashew nuts. The stated purpose was to make more of the harvest available to processors operating inside Burkina Faso. This was not merely symbolic. Authorities enforced the measure, including the seizure of more than 30 tons of cashews that officials said were being transported illegally for export. The government had also established a minimum farm gate price for the 2025 season of 385 CFA francs per kilogram, approximately 62 cents in United States currency at the time. That was higher than the previous year's minimum of 310 CFA francs. Together, these measures reveal the difficult balancing act behind the government's strategy. Domestic processors need access to raw cashews. Farmers, however, need reliable buyers and timely payment. Restricting exports can redirect supplies toward local factories, but it can also reduce the number of buyers competing for a farmer's crop. If domestic processors lack enough money, storage, or operating capacity to purchase what farmers produce, the policy can create an unexpected problem. Cashews remain in Burkina Faso, but so does the farmers' unsold inventory. Some producers reported difficulties selling their harvest and financial losses during the suspension. By May 2025, the government lifted the export restriction, after officials said processors had received improved supplies and industry participants had made commitments concerning domestic factories. That sequence matters. Burkina Faso did not impose a permanent ban on raw cashew exports, and the evidence does not support describing the policy as an African cashew cartel. Instead, the government used a temporary trade restriction as an instrument to influence where the harvest moved. The lesson is uncomfortable but essential. A minimum price protects farmers only when someone can actually buy their crop. And a domestic processing policy succeeds only when factories can absorb enough of the harvest without transferring the burden of industrialization onto producers. For Ibrahim Traore, therefore, keeping more value at home requires more than stopping cashews at the border. It requires building an economy capable of purchasing, processing, and selling them. The cashew strategy makes more sense when viewed as part of Ibrahim Traore's broader economic agenda. His message has not been limited to one crop. Across several projects, the government has emphasized a similar principle. Burkina Faso should seek to process more of what it produces instead of allowing valuable raw materials to leave before additional economic activity can develop at home. This approach can be understood on three levels. The first is political direction. Traore has repeatedly encouraged domestic industrialization and the transformation of local resources into higher value products. The second is implementation. His government has supported industrial projects through public institutions, financing mechanisms, infrastructure, and cooperation with private investors. Burkina Cajou illustrates this model. The factory originated as a private Burkinabe project, while the state helped it overcome obstacles that had slowed its development. The third is changing expectations for Burkinabe business itself. Traore has encouraged local entrepreneurs to move beyond simply trading commodities and invest more heavily in production and processing. The same philosophy can be seen in projects involving corn, tomatoes, flour, edible oils, and other locally available resources. Cashews offer an especially revealing example. At Penny, another initiative has focused not only on the valuable cashew kernel, but also on the cashew apple, a part of the crop that can often be underused. Plans have included products such as juice, concentrates, vinegar, and ethanol. That changes the economic question again. Instead of asking only how much money Burkina Faso can earn from exporting a nut, policymakers can ask how many useful products, jobs, businesses, and skills can emerge from the entire crop. But political determination cannot guarantee commercial success. Traore can encourage investment. His government can support factories and influence trade policy. It cannot command international customers to buy Burkinabe products or guarantee that every processing facility will operate efficiently. That is why his influence should ultimately be judged by measurable outcomes. If more raw materials are processed locally, factories operate consistently, workers gain durable employment, farmers find dependable buyers, and competitive products reach international markets, the strategy will have evidence behind it. Until then, Burkina Faso is attempting a structural transition, not celebrating a completed economic revolution. At this point, a dramatic version of the story would introduce a powerful foreign enemy determined to stop Burkina Faso. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. Ibrahim Traore has certainly faced sharp criticism from Western media, research organizations, and human rights groups. Critics have questioned his government's record on security, political freedoms, human rights, and the information environment surrounding his growing international image. Those debates are real, but they should not be confused with evidence that Western governments launched a campaign against Burkina Faso because it wanted to process cashews at home. There is no reliable evidence that France forced Burkina Faso to reverse its cashew policy. There is no verified case showing that the United States imposed sanctions because of domestic cashew processing, nor is there solid evidence that European processing plants collapsed because Burkina Faso temporarily restricted raw exports. The claim that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger created an alliance of Sahel states cashew cartel, is also unsupported by the evidence we reviewed. In fact, the picture is more interesting. European trade organizations have identified Burkina Faso as a growing supplier of processed cashew kernels to Europe, and international development institutions have supported efforts in neighboring Côte d'Ivoire to increase domestic cashew processing and create more local jobs. That does not mean foreign economic interests disappear. Companies will naturally seek reliable supplies, competitive prices, and favorable trading conditions. Burkina Faso will seek better opportunities for its farmers, workers, and businesses. Those interests can sometimes conflict. But the central struggle is not simply Africa against the West. It is about Burkina Faso trying to change its position inside a global market. Instead of participating mainly near the beginning of the chain, the country wants to perform more of the work that happens before a cashew reaches consumers. That distinction also gives us a fairer way to judge Traore. Ignore the heroic images and hostile headlines for a moment. Watch the measurable results. How much is actually processed? Are farmers earning sustainable incomes? Are factories creating lasting jobs? Can Burkinabe products compete abroad? Those questions matter more than propaganda from either side. And another West African country already provides evidence of what can happen when domestic cashew processing moves from ambition to scale. Côte d'Ivoire offers one of the clearest examples of what Burkina Faso is trying to achieve, and also of how difficult that transformation can be. In 2015, Côte d'Ivoire had roughly 68,515 tons of installed cashew processing capacity. By 2024, that capacity had risen to about 350,000 tons. More importantly, over 345,000 tons of raw cashews were actually processed inside the country that year. That distinction matters. These were not simply machines waiting inside factories. Raw agricultural production was moving through an expanding domestic industrial system. According to the World Bank, investments in the cashew value chain helped create more than 18,000 jobs. Roughly 2/3 of those jobs went to women. But Côte d'Ivoire did not achieve this by building factories alone. The country also needed roads connecting producers with markets, financing for processors, storage, training, better agricultural practices, technology, quality control, and access to buyers. There were setbacks as well. When global cashew prices fell in 2020, processors faced severe pressure after purchasing raw materials at higher prices. Some operations struggled or temporarily stopped activities. That experience offers Burkina Faso a warning and an opportunity. Industrialization requires an entire chain strong enough to survive both good years and difficult ones. The lesson also extends beyond cashews. Mali does not need to copy Burkina Faso's cashew strategy exactly. Neither does Niger. Cooperation within the alliance of Sahel states can instead begin with a broader question. What resources leave these economies before African workers and businesses have a realistic opportunity to perform more valuable stages of production? Across Africa, that question can apply to cocoa, cotton, agricultural products, metals, and other resources. But every country must examine its own electricity, transportation, workforce, financing, technology, and access to markets before deciding which processing industries make economic sense. The goal should not be to build factories simply because factories symbolize independence. The goal should be to build competitive industries that can survive. That may be the most useful lesson Burkina Faso can take from Côte d'Ivoire. Do not copy the appearance of industrialization. Build the entire value chain that allows industrialization to work. Return to the two cashews that began the story on the same tree in Burkina Faso. One leaves the country early in its economic journey. The other remains longer, passing through local workers, machines, warehouses, quality controls, and businesses before reaching international markets. Neither path guarantees prosperity, but the second creates an opportunity for Burkina Faso to participate in more stages between the farm and the consumer. That is the real test facing Ibrahim Traore. Success should not be measured by speeches, factory openings, or promises of capacity. It should be measured by how many tons are actually processed, whether farmers receive dependable incomes, whether factories remain productive, whether workers gain lasting jobs, and whether Burkinabe products can compete internationally. This is why the cashew story matters beyond Burkina Faso. For Mali under Assimi Goïta and Niger under Abdourahmane Tchiani, cooperation across the Sahel does not require copying the same crop or the same policy. It means asking which resources could support more African production before leaving the region. For West Africa and the African Union, that question reaches far beyond agriculture. It concerns who develops skills, who owns productive capacity, and where the next generation finds meaningful work. It also requires avoiding a false choice between Africa and the outside world. France, Europe, America, and other markets can remain customers and partners. Economic sovereignty does not require isolation. It requires greater choice. Burkina Faso can sell raw materials when that makes economic sense. But if it can competitively process, package, and eventually build brands around its own resources, it gains another option and potentially keeps more economic activity at home. That is why this story deserves attention in African news and in every serious discussion of Ibrahim Traore and Africa's economic future. The question is no longer simply how many cashews Burkina Faso can grow. The question is how much opportunity can be built around every harvest. Subscribe if you want more evidence-based stories about Africa's changing economic choices. And tell us which African resource should become the next test of this value-added strategy. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos